The neighborhood had always been a quilt of tranquility, stitched together by the warm camaraderie of familiar faces and the quiet hum of daily life. My corner house, a white colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch, stood at the edge, overlooking the tree-lined street, like a sentinel, a place of peace. Or so I thought until Karen moved in across the street. It started small. A note slipped into my mailbox one morning for the upkeep of community standards. It read, handwritten in the neat, looping script of someone with too much time on her hands, a request no, a demand to remove the wind chimes from my porch. Too noisy, she claimed. I smiled at the irony as I folded the paper and tucked it in my pocket. The chimes were as soft as a summer breeze, barely a whisper in the symphony of suburban life. Karen's house was a fortress of immaculate order. The lawn, a perfect green carpet, was mowed with military precision. Her flower beds, regimented rows of roses, stood like soldiers on parade. Her presence was as sharp and unyielding as the hedges that divided her property from the rest. From her window, she watched the street with the keen eye of a hawk circling its prey. My response was simple. I left the chimes where they were, their gentle song a testament to my resistance against unwarranted control. I knew she would hear them as she sipped her morning coffee, fingers drumming an irritated rhythm against the pristine surface of her kitchen table. Each delicate note seemed a small victory. Then came another note, this one affixed to my door. My heart lightened with a mix of amusement and disbelief. Trash cans must be out of sight, it instructed sternly. I envisioned Karen, her expression tight with disapproval, as she patrolled the neighborhood with the self-appointed authority of a monarch. It was almost admirable, her dedication to enforcing her vision of perfection, determined to keep the peace. I wheeled my bins behind the garage, feeling the weight of her scrutiny even in my own backyard. Each concession, a small price for serenity. I thought, a mere ripple on the surface of my otherwise calm existence. But ripples, if left unchecked, can stir the waters into waves. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, I sat on my porch, listening to the crickets begin their nightly chorus. I realized that the neighborhood, this patchwork of lives and stories, held more than Karen's narrow vision. It held a secret, one that she had overlooked in her quest for control, a fact she'd never considered. The deeds to every house, every plot of land, rested in a safe upstairs, signed in my name, a quiet inheritance, a legacy passed down through generations like a whispered promise. Karen, for all her bluster and bravado, was a tenant in my kingdom, a queen without a crown, her edicts as insubstantial as smoke on the breeze. I smiled to myself, a quiet smile that held the promise of storms yet to come. In the stillness of the night, the wind chimes sang their gentle song, their melody carrying a hint of the reckoning that lay ahead. As the summer haze settled over our small suburban enclave, Karen's antics elevated, much like the humidity that clung to our skin. Her eyes seemed to blaze with a new fervor as she patrolled the neighborhood, clipboard gripped like a scepter, anointing herself queen of rules and regulations. It began subtly, a new edict, freshly printed and taped to every mailbox: no grass over 3 inches. A bizarre decree in a place where lawns were as varied as the residents themselves. Mine, a patchwork of wildflowers and well-tended chaos, stood defiantly amid the manicured conformity. Karen's crusade against my nonconformity was gaining momentum. The following week, I found a neon pink note clipped to my door, a citation for an unapproved shade of blue on my front door, a color that, until now, had been a conversation starter at neighborhood gatherings. Karen saw rebellion in what had been described by others as charming whimsy. I could almost hear the self-satisfied click of her pen as she scribbled down my supposed transgressions. Her next move was more insidious. Whispers drifted through the air like dandelion seeds. Neighbors, once friendly, now offered tight-lipped smiles or none at all. Stories of my supposed disregard for community harmony spread with the speed of wildfire. I was painted as an outsider, a usurper who threatened the fragile peace Karen claimed to nurture. In the quiet of my evenings, I watched her from my window, a shadowy figure prowling under the streetlights, a watchdog sniffing out a threat only she perceived. She was tireless, relentless, ensuring each blade of grass conformed, each vehicle parked at an angle that met her exacting standards. But I held a secret. Beneath her escalating tactics, I remained calm, a deep reservoir of patience that she could not see. She was unaware that the very land she sought to control was bound to me by deeds and contracts she would never discover. I moved through the neighborhood, invisible chains of ownership anchored in every plot. The tension reached a pitch one windy afternoon. The sky brooded with dark clouds, and Karen arrived at my door, her face a storm of righteous indignation. For the first time, words pierced the air. A singular decree. If you can't follow the rules, maybe you shouldn't live here. Her voice cracked like distant thunder. Inside, I felt a shift. A quiet power surged, an uncoiling of restraint. This skirmish under the gathering storm was a turning point. The rules she wielded like weapons were nothing more than paper tigers against the reality of my position. In that moment, I chose to be the eye of the hurricane she had conjured. Calm and unyielding, I waited, knowing that revelations were on the horizon, a light breaking through the clouds. Her carefully constructed facade was destined to crumble, and in its place, the truth would stand, immutable and unassailable. She had no inkling of the reckoning that lay ahead, nor of the quiet satisfaction I would take in watching the unfolding of her realization. Karen's world was built on illusion, and time, with its unerring precision, would reveal everything. That, I was certain, was a truth far more enduring than any rule she could invent. The early morning sun crept through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the room. A gentle reminder of the day's impending revelations, I sat at my kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, a silent vigil for the calm before the storm. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with its usual rhythms, unaware of the quietly orchestrated crescendo soon to unfold. Karen's latest crusade, an attempt to root out what she perceived as nonconformity, had reached its zenith. Her voice, always hovering just above a shrill whisper, had been the soundtrack to my evenings. Through the thin walls of our adjoining properties, I'd heard her plans. The manufactured outrage, the feigned benevolence shrouding her insidious intent. She wielded the HOA rules like a seasoned conductor, each clause a note in her symphony of control. What she didn't realize was that I had my own score to settle. Over the past weeks, I'd documented everything, every petty infraction she'd noted, every veiled threat, every breach of privacy. It all lay meticulously organized in a digital vault. But my countermove wasn't a simple playback of her missteps. It was a carefully crafted narrative shift, a subtle reminder of the board's oversight and my own quietly influential presence. I retrieved a thin folder from the drawer. Its contents were unassuming, yet potent, a silent testament to the power of documentation. The pages whispered a story of entitlement and overreach, of a woman consumed by her own reflection in the neighborhood pond. I placed it gently in my briefcase, an unassuming companion for the day ahead. The board meeting would start in an hour, and I intended to arrive early. The room would be sterile, as always, the air conditioned to an uncomfortable chill, as if the temperature alone could suppress the passions often ignited within those walls. The faces around the table would be familiar, each lined with varying degrees of compliance or dissent. Karen would sit at the head, of course, her posture a study in false bravado. She would issue a perfunctory greeting, her eyes scanning for my reaction. I would offer none, instead settling into my chair with the quiet confidence of a person who held the trump card. Time passed slowly. My watch ticking with the precision of a metronome, the room filled gradually. A symphony of shuffling papers and muted conversations. I watched, an observer in the eye of a storm, the anticipation building like an electric charge in the air. When the meeting began, she launched into her performance. The cadence of her voice rose and fell, a practiced routine that painted me as the rogue element in her harmonious community. My turn came, and I simply slid the folder across the table. The room fell into a hush, curiosity momentarily silencing allegiance. They read, page by page. The facade crumbled, each revelation a quiet crescendo in the symphony I'd composed. Karen's mask slipped, her veneer cracking under the weight of her own machinations. It was rare to see her at a loss for words, but silence can be the loudest admission of all. I didn't relish the victory. It was simply necessary. A rebalancing of scales tipped too far by one person's ambition. As the meeting adjourned, I left the room, the whispers trailing in my wake, a chorus of realization still settling into place. Outside, the sun had fully risen, casting its warm light over the neighborhood, my neighborhood, a place where shadows had met the dawn, and balance had been restored. I walked home, each step a quiet affirmation of things put right. The moment Karen tried to put a notice on my door, the neighborhood began to ripple with an undercurrent of curiosity. It was subtle at first, like a breeze before a storm, but gradually it gained momentum, gathering whispers and raised eyebrows. Mornings over coffee were no longer about idle chatter or nods exchanged over freshly pruned hedges. Instead, they became a theater of glances and hushed speculations. The air was thick with it, a tension that clung to the picket fences and well-manicured lawns like dew. I watched from my window, the neighborhood unfolding before me like an intricately woven tapestry. Each thread was a story, each knot a secret. Yet, I held the loom. Karen, with her clipboard and self-importance, was but a brightly colored thread, glaringly out of place among the soft, earthy tones of our cul-de-sac. The irony was not lost on me. Her attempts to tighten her hold only loosened the strings of control she never truly possessed. She walked with an air of authority, her steps echoing with imagined power. But the facade was cracking. Our neighbors weren't blind, just polite. They saw her for the storm in a teacup she was, a tempest, raging in a world that didn't belong to her. Her notices and complaints were an itch that couldn't be scratched away. They weren't about me. They were symbols of a brittle empire crumbling under its own pretense. And the neighborhood, well, they were starting to notice. Small acts of rebellion sprang up like weeds in a garden she desperately tried to maintain. Lawns once mowed to perfection now sported wildflowers. Fences painted pristine white dared to show chips of neglect. As if in silent protest, I leaned back in my chair, my gaze drifting over the neighborhood. My neighborhood. Nostalgia wrapped around me like a favorite sweater. This place had history. Stories buried deeper than any regulation could reach. My father had set the foundations here. Brick by brick. Dream by dream. It was ours long before the first stone of Karen's house was laid. Afternoons turned listless under the summer sun. Shadows stretched lazily across the sidewalks. Mingling with the growing discord, I saw neighbors exchange knowing looks, their eyes darting to her house with a mix of amusement and disdain. Her attempts at dominance were becoming a comedy of errors, a performance no one had bought tickets for, but everyone watched, captivated. Then, one afternoon, a knock on my door, a neighbor, a friend really, leaning in, voice low, words deliberate. "Is it true?" they asked, their question heavy with implication. I nodded, a small gesture that sent ripples through the narrative Karen had tried to weave. The truth settled over the neighborhood with a quiet inevitability. Like the first drop of rain after an oppressive heat wave, it was freeing, vindication in the form of understanding, an unspoken camaraderie against a mutual antagonist. Karen's reign was waning, a star bound to fade. The neighborhood, once a stage for her one-woman show, slowly reclaimed its script, and I watched, the quiet orchestrator of a drama she never saw coming. The morning light filtered through my window, casting long shadows that danced across the polished hardwood floors. The world outside seemed deceptively serene, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within the confines of these manicured streets. Each house stood as a silent sentinel, unaware of the simmering tension beneath its tiled roof. Karen had overplayed her hand. Her latest move, an audacious attempt to evict me from my own home, had been as brazen as it was desperate. She had no idea of the quiet power I wielded. Ownership was a fickle thing, a game of hidden cards, and the deck was stacked in my favor. My morning routine was unhurried, deliberate. Coffee brewed with a rich aroma that mingled with the crisp morning air seeping through the window. The steam curled upwards, a wisp of determination. I sipped slowly, savoring the moment. The irony was not lost on me. Karen's world was about to shift beneath her feet, and she didn't even know it. In her mind, she was a queen ruling her plastic kingdom with an iron fist, but the board meeting later would be the final act, my silent coup. Her reign had been built on fragile foundations, and I was ready to pull out the keystone. As I prepared for the day, I flicked through the documents on my desk. Each paper was a piece of a puzzle only I knew how to solve. Titles, deeds, contracts, a symphony of legal jargon that sang of ownership and control. Karen might have had the board's temporary backing, but she lacked the foresight to see past her own ambition. Stepping outside, the morning chill nipped at my skin. The neighborhood bore the hushed stillness of dawn, the air expectant, as if holding its breath for what was to come. I moved through the streets with a quiet confidence, each step a reminder of the lease I held on every blade of grass and every brick that made up this suburban sprawl. The board meeting was a necessary formality, a stage set for revelation. I arrived early, the room still empty except for the echo of secrets held within walls. I settled into a chair, papers in hand. The calm before the storm. Karen arrived last, a whirlwind of faux authority, her eyes meeting mine with a challenge she was ill-equipped to understand. The meeting commenced with the usual preamble, the board members glancing at each other. Oblivious to the undercurrents of the gathering storm, Karen spoke with her usual bravado, her voice a knife attempting to cut through the tension. It was almost admirable. Her confidence, if it wasn't so tragically misguided. And then the moment came, my moment, a gentle clearing of my throat as I slid the papers across the table. The room stilled, eyes drawn to the documents that lay like a gauntlet, thrown at the feet of her false empire. I watched with quiet satisfaction as realization dawned on her face, a slow cascade of disbelief, confusion, and finally, resignation. That this neighborhood, I said, the only words necessary, belongs to me. The silence was profound, a vacuum where her delusions had once thrived. It swallowed her protests, her indignation, leaving only the stark truth. The board members shifted uncomfortably, caught between the reality of my declaration and the remnants of her crumbling facade. Karen's reign ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet shuffling of papers and the subtle nods of acknowledgement from those around the table. My victory was unspoken, yet absolute, a quiet revolution in a land of whispering trees and silent streets. As I left the meeting, the air felt lighter, as if the buildings themselves sighed in relief. Ownership was more than a piece of paper. It was the power of silence, the strength of unseen strings, guiding the marionette dance of those who thought they pulled the cords. Karen had been a formidable opponent, her downfall a testament to her own hubris, but the neighborhood was mine, always had been. She just never saw the bigger picture. The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the central air conditioning. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of tangerine and aubergine. Inside, a different kind of transformation was unfolding. Faces once tense with anticipation relaxed into expressions of relief and satisfaction. Karen stood at the edge of the room, arms folded tightly across her chest, a fortress of defiance. Her eyes darted around, seeking allies among the gathered homeowners, but the crowd, once easily swayed by her shrill declarations of order and propriety, now looked elsewhere. They were no longer under her spell, and it was a revelation to witness the subtle shift in power. The irony was delicious. Here I stood, the quiet owner of this entire neighborhood, a secret I had held close like a cherished heirloom. I had watched Karen weave her web of control, knowing that a single tug of the thread could unravel it all. I watched her face, a landscape of disbelief and denial, as the truth settled like dust around her. The board had convened earlier, a meeting she hadn't anticipated, one that didn't require her shrill voice to reach a consensus. I had suggested a review of community policies, a subtle hint at the change I intended to implement. The board members, once her staunch supporters, had listened with the attentiveness of students learning a new truth. I spoke of community, of mutual respect, of shared spaces that should be enjoyed and not policed. My words were measured, deliberate, a stark contrast to her usual diatribes. The truth of my ownership was revealed, not as a weapon, but as a gentle nudge towards a new beginning. Karen's influence, long a shadow over the neighborhood, was fading. Her power, built on fear and bluster, crumbled beneath the weight of the community's newfound autonomy. They no longer needed her to dictate their lives. They had found their voices, their strength, and it was beautiful to witness. I drifted through the room like a silent conductor, orchestrating a symphony of change. Conversations swirled around me, voices lifted in hopeful discussion, plans for a community garden, a summer block party, even a book club. Ideas that had been stifled under Karen's reign now flowed freely. Karen, for her part, remained silent, a lone island in the sea of renewed camaraderie. Her eyes met mine once, a flash of defiance quickly masked by an inscrutable expression, but I saw it. The grudging respect, the acknowledgement of defeat. A new chapter was beginning, one that embraced inclusivity and collaboration. The neighborhood was transformed, not by a single act, but by the collective will of its people. It was a testament to the power of quiet resolve and the strength found in unity. As the evening drew to a close, and the room began to empty, I stood at the doorway, watching the homeowners drift into the night, their voices mingling with the cool evening air. Karen lingered, the last to leave, her footsteps hesitant. For a moment, she paused beside me, a question hanging in the air between us. I offered a nod, a silent promise of a new beginning. She turned, her silhouette disappearing into the twilight, a ghost of her former self. The neighborhood was mine, but it belonged to them too. A shared space, a renewed community, the balance restored, the story rewritten.